Frank was 69 years old, and he was a man who followed the rules. He took his blood pressure medication every morning at 8 a.m. He avoided the salt shaker like it was a poison. He walked his neighborhood 3 times a week. By all accounts, Frank was doing everything right. But every time he sat in my office, the monitor told a different story. His blood pressure remained stubbornly high, a constant thumping 155/95. Frank was frustrated. He felt like he was fighting a losing battle against his own genetics. He told me, "Dr. Watanabe, I'm taking the pills, I'm doing the walks, but I still feel like my heart is a ticking time bomb. Is this just what happens when you turn 70? I looked at Frank and told him something that many doctors are too busy to explain. I told him that while medication is a vital tool, it is only one part of the equation. I told him that his kitchen was actually a forgotten pharmacy, and that his daily meals were sending biological instructions to his arteries that were either fueling the fire of hypertension or acting as a powerful, natural coolant. Frank didn't need more pills. He needed to stop making the invisible mistake that millions of seniors make every day, thinking that not eating salt is the same thing as eating for heart health. I'm Dr. Jason Watanabe. I have seen the inside of arteries that were stiff and brittle, and I have seen arteries that were flexible and resilient. The difference between the two isn't just luck or even exercise. It is often found in 5 specific, high-potency foods that most people over 60 are missing from their daily plates. There is a group of supernutrients that act as a natural biological version of the very blood pressure medication Frank was taking. These foods don't just lower a number. They physically repair the lining of your vessels and tell your heart to relax. Today I'm going to reveal the top 5 foods I tell every one of my post-surgery patients to eat every single day. I'll explain the nitric oxide secret that these foods unlock, why your aging kidneys are starving for one specific color of vegetable, and the 10-second kitchen test to know if your breakfast is secretly raising your pressure. Frank changed just 5 things about his daily diet, and within 21 days, his blood pressure did something it hadn't done in a decade. But to understand how he did it, we first have to look at the hidden fire that was burning inside his arteries. Frank's diet wasn't bad in the way most people think. He wasn't eating fast food or drinking soda. But as I looked at his daily habits, I realized his arteries were suffering from a condition I call vascular starvation. Every blood vessel in your body is lined with a microscopically thin layer of cells called the endothelium. In the surgical world, we think of this layer as the Teflon coating of your cardiovascular system. When it's healthy, it's slippery. It prevents blood clots from sticking, and it produces a critical gas called nitric oxide. This gas is the master signal that tells your arteries to relax and widen. It is your body's natural defense against high blood pressure. But as we cross the age of 60, our production of nitric oxide drops by nearly 50%. Your Teflon coating becomes more like Velcro. It gets sticky, it gets stiff, and your arteries lose their ability to expand when your heart pumps blood through them. Frank's medication was trying to force his vessels to relax, but his body didn't have the raw materials to finish the job. This brings us to the first food I told Frank he had to eat every single day: the nitrate powerhouses. Specifically, I'm talking about beets and dark leafy greens like arugula, spinach, and kale. I told Frank to stop looking at these as side dishes and start looking at them as high-potency medicine. These vegetables are packed with natural dietary nitrates. When you chew them, the bacteria in your mouth and the enzymes in your stomach convert those nitrates into, you guessed it, nitric oxide. A study published in the journal Hypertension showed that drinking just 1 glass of beet juice can lower systolic blood pressure by nearly 10 points within a few hours. For a senior like Frank, that is the same effect as a standard dose of a pharmaceutical ACE inhibitor, but without the side effects. By flooding his system with these natural nitrates, Frank was manually unlocking his stiffened arteries. I told Frank to start his day with a green and red shot, a small smoothie of steamed beets and a handful of arugula. He hated the taste at first, but I told him to think of it as a liquid plumber for his vessels. Within just 1 week, the thumping sensation in his ears began to fade. His arteries were finally getting the signal they had been starving for. But nitric oxide is only the first step. To keep the pressure down, you have to manage the fluid balance in your system, and that requires a second food that most people over 60 are actually afraid to eat because of a common medical myth. Frank believed that his battle with salt was a defensive war. He spent his time checking labels for milligrams of sodium and avoiding the salt shaker. He thought that by keeping salt out of his body, he was keeping his blood pressure down. But as a cardiac surgeon, I see the human body as a delicate balance, a seesaw, and Frank was only looking at one side of the plank. In your body, sodium and potassium are constantly playing a game of tug-of-war. Sodium's job is to pull water into your bloodstream, which increases your blood volume and raises your pressure. Potassium's job is exactly the opposite. It acts as a natural diuretic, telling your kidneys to flush excess sodium out through your urine. It also physically relaxes the walls of your blood vessels. The mistake Frank was making, and perhaps you are too, is focusing entirely on low sodium while ignoring the high potassium side of the seesaw. As we get older, our kidneys become less efficient at processing salt. They need a higher concentration of potassium to perform the sodium flush. Without enough potassium, even a low-salt diet won't be enough to lower your pressure. This brings us to the second food Frank had to eat every single day, the Potassium Kings. Most people think of bananas, but as a doctor, I want you to look towards something even more potent, the humble baked potato with the skin, or the avocado. A medium-baked potato actually has nearly twice the potassium of a banana, and it contains 0 fat. Frank had been told for years to avoid potatoes because of carbs. This is the myth I had to bust for him. When you eat a potato with the skin on, the fiber slows down the sugar absorption, but the massive dose of potassium, nearly 900 milligrams, hits your system like a biological reset button. It forces your kidneys to finally dump the salt that has been lingering in your tissues for years. I told Frank to have 1 small baked potato or half an avocado every single day at lunch. I called it his sodium exit door. Within 2 weeks, the swelling in Frank's ankles, a classic sign of sodium retention, completely vanished. His pipes were no longer holding on to excess fluid because the potassium was finally allowed to push the drain button. But managing fluid is only part of the journey. To truly protect an aging heart, we have to talk about the elasticity of the vessels themselves, and that requires a specific type of fat that most people over 60 are actually not eating enough of, despite what the headlines say. Frank grew up in an era where fat was the enemy. He spent 30 years buying low-fat yogurt, low-fat milk, and avoiding any oils. He thought he was being heart healthy, but as a surgeon, I saw a different reality. When I open a heart and look at the arteries of someone who has avoided all fats, I often find vessels that are dry, brittle, and inflamed. Your arteries need a specific type of lubrication to remain flexible under pressure. If your arteries are like a high-pressure hose, they need to be able to expand and contract thousands of times a day. If they become stiff, the pressure has nowhere to go but up, which damages the delicate valves of your heart. To keep these hoses flexible, you need the highest quality biological oil available. This brings us to the third food Frank added to his daily protocol, extra virgin olive oil, EVOO. Now, I'm not talking about the cheap, blended oil you find on the bottom shelf of the supermarket. I'm talking about high-quality, cold-pressed, extra virgin olive oil. This oil is rich in a specific type of antioxidant called polyphenols, particularly one called oleocanthal. In the medical world, we know that these polyphenols are powerful anti-inflammatories. They act like a soothing balm on the inside of your vessels, reducing the chronic inflammation that causes plaque to stick to your artery walls. A landmark study known as the Predimed trial showed that a Mediterranean diet supplemented with 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day significantly reduced the risk of major cardiovascular events. For Frank, those 4 tablespoons were his vascular insurance policy. He started drizzling it over his baked potato and his arugula salad. He wasn't frying with it. He was eating it raw to preserve the delicate medicinal compounds. By adding this arterial oil to his daily diet, Frank was doing something his medication could never do. He was improving the structural compliance of his vessels. He was turning his lead pipes back into rubber hoses. But as his vessels became more flexible, we had to address one more factor, the stickiness of his blood itself. And for that, we turned to a food that most people over 60 consider a cheat meal rather than a medicine. Frank had a sweet tooth that he felt very guilty about. Every night after dinner, he would fight the urge to have a cookie or a piece of cake. He thought that if he ever gave in to a treat, he was sabotaging his heart. But when he told me about his cravings, I told him something that brought a smile to his face for the first time in weeks. I told him he should be eating chocolate every single day. But there was a catch. It couldn't be the sugary, milk-filled chocolate you find at the checkout counter. It had to be extra dark chocolate, at least 80% cacao. As a cardiac surgeon, I am fascinated by flavanols. These are plant-based compounds that are incredibly concentrated in the cacao bean. In the human body, flavanols have a remarkable effect. They act like a natural blood thinner without the dangerous side effects of pharmaceuticals. They improve the stickiness of your blood, what we call platelet aggregation, ensuring that your blood flows smoothly through your smallest capillaries without clumping. More importantly, these flavanols are one of the most powerful natural triggers for the endothelium to produce that nitric oxide gas I mentioned earlier. A meta-analysis published in the journal BMC Medicine found that daily consumption of dark chocolate could lead to a significant reduction in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. I told Frank to have 2 small squares of 85% dark chocolate after his lunch. I called it his bitter medicine. At first, he found it too intense, too dark, and not sweet enough. But I told him that the bitterness he was tasting was the actual medicine. Within 2 weeks, his palate shifted. He stopped craving the sugary cookies and started looking forward to that earthy, rich bite of cacao. By adding dark chocolate, Frank was attacking his high blood pressure from a neurological angle. The flavanols were relaxing his system, and the magnesium in the chocolate was acting as a calming agent for his heart's electrical rhythm. But there is one final food, the 5th and perhaps most important structural food, that Frank was missing. It's a food that provides the building blocks for his heart muscle itself. Frank had one final hurdle in his grocery store pharmacy. He had spent his entire adult life being told that fruit is full of sugar and that sugar was the enemy of his heart. Because of this, he had almost entirely eliminated fruit from his diet. He thought he was being a disciplined patient, but as a cardiac surgeon, I knew he was missing out on the most powerful structural compound in nature. I told Frank that while processed sugar in a soda is a poison, the sugar in a whole piece of fruit is a delivery system for medicine. Specifically, I wanted him to eat blueberries every single day. Why blueberries? In the world of cardiovascular research, blueberries are famous for a group of pigments called anthocyanins. These are the compounds that give the berries their deep blue color. In your body, anthocyanins act like a pressure reliever for your arterial walls. They specifically target arterial stiffness, which is the primary driver of high blood pressure in people over the age of 60. When your arteries become stiff, your heart has to kick harder to move blood through them. This kick is what causes that high systolic number, the top number on your monitor. A study published in the Journal of Gerontology found that eating just 1 cup of blueberries daily for a month led to a significant decrease in blood pressure and improved the function of the blood vessel lining. For someone like Frank, this was the equivalent of softening a hardened rubber hose so that the water can flow through it without the pump having to strain. I told Frank to add 1 cup of blueberries, fresh or frozen, to his morning oatmeal or his plain yogurt. I told him that this wasn't a treat, it was a structural repair kit for his aging vessels. The beauty of the blueberry is that it works in tandem with the other 4 foods. The nitrates from the greens open the vessels, the potassium from the potato flushes the salt, the olive oil soothes the inflammation, the dark chocolate thins the flow, and the blueberries soften the pipes themselves. Frank started his pressure reliever habit on a Monday. He found it was the easiest part of the whole plan because it was delicious. But as he began to combine all 5 of these foods, something happened to his energy levels that he didn't expect. He realized that high blood pressure hadn't just been a number on a screen. It had been a thief that was stealing his vitality every single day. In our next part, I'm going to share the action plan Frank used to fit all 5 of these foods into a single day without feeling like he was eating rabbit food. And I'll reveal the 10-second kitchen test you must do to ensure your meals are actually helping your heart and not secretly sabotaging it. Frank sat at his kitchen table and looked at the 5 items we had discussed: the beets, the potato, the olive oil, the dark chocolate, and the berries. He asked me, "Doc, this sounds great on paper, but how do I actually live like this? I don't want to spend my whole day in the kitchen." I told Frank that heart health isn't about complexity. It's about consistency. I gave him a simple structure that I call the Heart Pharmacy Day. For breakfast, Frank had his blueberry power bowl, oatmeal or plain Greek yogurt topped with a cup of blueberries. This provided his pressure reliever, anthocyanins, first thing in the morning. At lunch, he had his nitrate salad, a bed of arugula and steamed beets, drizzled with 2 tablespoons of high-quality extra virgin olive oil. This was his Teflon coating and arterial oil working together. For dinner, he had his sodium exit door, a small baked potato, skin on, or a half of an avocado as a side dish. This ensured his kidneys were flushing salt all evening while he slept. And finally, for dessert, he had his 2 squares of dark chocolate. He wasn't eating rabbit food. He was eating a gourmet, nutrient-dense protocol that felt like a reward rather than a restriction. But how did Frank know it was working? I gave him the 10-second shin press. This is a clinical test I want you to do right now. Sit down and find the bone on the front of your lower leg, your shin. Take your thumb and press it firmly against that bone for exactly 10 seconds. When you let go, look at the skin. Does your thumb leave a dent or a pit that takes a few seconds to disappear? In the medical world, we call this pitting edema. It is a physical sign that your heart and kidneys are struggling to manage the fluid in your body. It means your pipes are overpressurized with salt and water. When Frank started this protocol, his dent lasted for nearly 5 seconds. But after just 14 days of eating his Potassium Kings and nitrate powerhouses, his skin snapped back instantly. He was no longer a water balloon. His body was finally in balance. Frank felt the difference in his shoes. They were loose for the first time in years. He felt the difference in his breathing. He didn't get winded walking up the driveway. But more importantly, he felt the difference in his spirit. He realized he wasn't a victim of his age. He was a commander of his own biology. In our final part, I'm going to share the final result of Frank's experiment, the exact numbers he saw on his monitor after 21 days. And I'll give you the most important surgeon's warning about your blood pressure medication that you must hear before you take your next pill. Frank walked back into my office 3 weeks after he had started his heart pharmacy protocol. He didn't just sit down, he practically glided into the chair. The redness in his face was gone, replaced by a healthy, vibrant complexion. When my nurse wrapped the cuff around his arm and pressed the button, we all waited in silence for the monitor to beep. The numbers were staggering, 128/78. Frank had dropped nearly 25 points from his systolic pressure in just 21 days. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked, "How is this possible, Doc? I've been on the pills for years and never saw a number like that." I told Frank that while his medication was holding a line, his food was finally winning the war. By eating the nitrate powerhouses, the Potassium Kings, the arterial oil, the bitter medicine, and the pressure reliever berries every single day, he had physically changed the environment of his arteries. He had turned his internal Velcro back into Teflon. He had given his kidneys the tools to flush out the excess water and salt. He had essentially given his heart a vacation from the constant strain of high-pressure pumping. But here is the most important surgeon's warning I gave Frank, and it is the one I must give you before you leave. Do not stop your blood pressure medication. Even though Frank's numbers were perfect, I told him that the heart is a creature of habit. If your body has been relying on a chemical crutch for years, suddenly removing it can cause a violent rebound spike in pressure that can trigger a stroke or a heart attack. Your goal is to use these 5 foods to make your body so healthy that your doctor, and only your doctor, decides to lower or eliminate your prescription. You are eating to make the medication less necessary, but you must respect the chemistry your system is currently used to. Frank realized that his health wasn't something that happened to him. It was something he created 3 times a day at his kitchen table. He wasn't getting old. He was getting restored. Your heart is a masterpiece of biology that has been beating for you since before you were born. It has never taken a break, and it asks for very little in return. It simply asks for the raw materials it needs to stay flexible and the right signals to stay calm. By adding these 5 foods to your daily routine, you are honoring that masterpiece. You are ensuring that your next 20 years are defined by vitality and independence, rather than by a monitor and a pill bottle. I want to hear from you now. This community is a global network of people who are reclaiming their health, and I am honored to walk this path with you. Where on this planet are you listening to me from right now? Let me know in the comments below. And I want us to support each other with our stories of resilience. Do you know someone, a friend, a parent, or a spouse, who has struggled with high blood pressure and finally found a way to manage it? Comment who they are and briefly share their journey. Your story might be the exact spark of hope that someone else needs to start their own heart pharmacy today. If this video helped you understand the medicinal power of your grocery list, please hit the like button and share it with those you care about. I'm Dr. Jason Watanabe. Eat with intention, honor your heart, and take good care of your health.